Business relations are often summed up in a contract. The problem is never really the contract. The problem is the nature of the relation that the parties have sort of gotten into. For instance, if you contract with an hospitality company, okay, let's say you have a party and you expect them to show up and take care of your party. And so 50 people had confirmed that they're going to attend your party. Later, 10 of them drop out. So you really don't want to pay those guys to take care of 50 people when only 40 are going to show up. So you call them and you tell them that, is it possible for us to change the cost and pretty much the arrangement so that it accommodates 40 people? If they say yes, then what you're actually doing is you're varying the contract, because you're making one change to a contract and you don't expect it to affect the entire contract. The problem is, if you're not careful, okay, you could think that you're changing one thing and then you end up changing pretty much 3 other things in that contract. So in this video, we're going to go over tips to consider when you're trying to vary, or rather when you're changing a contract. So we're going to start by, first of all, understanding what is contract variation. Contract variation is what happens when parties to a contract agree to do something in a contract differently from what they originally agreed, while the rest of the contract remains the same. Here are some of the things that you need to factor in. The first one is, make sure you have the nature of the entire contract in mind. So you just, again, as I said, you might think that I'm going to change one thing in a contract, and then you end up, that one thing end up changing a number of things. So before you make any change in a contract, okay, before you vary a term, a provision in a contract, you need to look if that change is you need to look into the change and see if it's going to affect the following: the service levels, payment provisions, liability provisions, for example, liquidated damages clauses, and termination clauses. In order to understand that, let's look at an example. So imagine a situation where you are contracting with another company. So in that contract, the original price is something like $300,000, and you have liquidated damage clause providing for recovery of about $200,000 in the event of a breach. Let's say later you agree to reduce the price to, the price of the contract to $210,000, but you do nothing about the liquidated damage. If the contract is breached, the issue of the $200,000 in liquidated damages may look extravagant, and courts could fail to enforce it. This was the case in Unioil v. Layton, 2014. What you should be understanding there is that, look, there are 2 things in a contract in terms of money. There is damages and then there is fine. Now, damages are intended to compensate the injured party, but fines are intended to punish the injured party. So if you set up your damage in such a way that it looks as though it's a fine, a court is not going to enforce it. Because if a contract is $210,000 and you're putting damages to be $200,000, of course, that looks like if you intend to it sort of seems extravagant. If you don't understand damages, I'm going to be doing a video later on that. So, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, that's a reason to subscribe. Now, the second thing you want to look at in terms, before you change a contract, is whether the variation is informal or not. It's simple. Just say no to informal variation, okay? If somebody calls you and say, I would like to change something in a contract, yeah, well, tell them, let's have that in writing. Make it formal. The reason is simple, because courts tend to not be so serious about informal contracts. Okay, it's not like if informal contracts are not contracts, it's just that they are hard to prove, okay? And again, if you're having a problem with that, you just have to look at something called the parole evidence rule, and that will help you to understand more about at what point can we allow for verbal or oral evidence to contradict a contract. But as a rule, if you're going to change something in a contract, have that thing in writing. Number 3, don't forget the price or consideration in the contract. Contracts are based on the principle of quid pro quo, meaning something for something. By consideration, you're talking about the price one party pays for the promise made by the other party. For instance, if you buy a house, you're losing money, the other person is losing a house. So price in a contract simply means what you lose in order for you to get into that contract. So if you're attending college, what you lose is money in the form of school fees, and the person who's teaching you probably is going to lose time and other things. But the point is, there is always going to be a price in the contract. So if something is to be changed, okay, if you are changing a certain term, the question is always going to be, what is the consideration in relation to this term that we are changing? Remember, at times, consideration may be sufficient if the parties are agreeing to go beyond what they were originally required to do. But then again, there are times when parties are just, they're just sort of just saying you're not taking in more obligations. So in that setup, it is practical to include token payments. For instance, $5 to be paid by any party which is not agreeing to undertake additional obligations. Of course, the one thing you have to remember is that variation by deed doesn't require consideration. So again, you always have to ask yourself, what sort of contract am I getting into? What sort of variation am I undertaking? And does it require consideration or not? Now, the other thing that you need to factor in is make sure you have a version of all the amendments produced. This is simple, okay? You could have a contract that is that big or that thick. So if you change something on like page 62 and page 100 and whatever it is, the point is you change something in the contract and later you want to know where that thing is. It's a good practice to make sure that all the changes that are made in the contract are produced, are printed out. In case you need to point at them, you can easily do that. So the point is, okay, the point is that if you're going to change a contract, there are things that you need to factor in. Those are some of the things that you need to factor in. If you're having a problem with contract law, there is a course that I did that handles, it's a simple course that sort of handles formation of contract all the way to termination of a contract. The link is in the video description. If you have any question, do let me know. I'm Moses from Zerite Network, and I'll see you in the next video.